To begin the fourth week's lecture, we're going to start with analysis versus description and how to write analysis of visual arts. So do yourself a favor and write 3 descriptive sentences about this statue. An example of a descriptive sentence is, "This figure's eyes gaze upward." So it's important to understand that description is different than analysis. The purpose of analysis is to show how intended meanings are communicated. So, its eyes gaze upward, description, suggesting a heaven-fixed gaze, or more bluntly, suggesting that the figure is divinely inspired. So analysis is kind of hard to define, but it's much easier than you might think. So this is a colossal figure of who? It is Constantine. So the question we want to ask is, what do we think is supposed to be communicated with its form? Take a few moments and write a sentence or two analyzing this sculpture, the seated scribe. Here's an example of a good analysis of the seated scribe. The sculptor of seated scribe, while using a traditionally symmetrical and serene style, also pays close attention to the individual personality of the scribe and presents him with some degree of naturalism. This attention to individuality and humanism probably indicates the scribe's mortality, especially when compared to the pharaohs. So as you can see here, good analysis consists of both description and what does this mean or do. Okay, now we're going to get into late antiquity, Jewish and early Christian art. So most, if not all, religious art can be split into these 2 categories: narrative image and iconic image. The development of the Christian church is so important to the canon of Western art because until the 1900s, it was the church and the state, usually a Christian state, that was commissioning the bulk of the art. Image is incredibly important in promoting certain ideas, especially religious ideas, and it's during Byzantium that this becomes true for the Christian church. So a narrative image recounts actual or fictional events and tells a story, and an iconic image offers a tangible expression of an intangible concept. We're entering an area of the world that used to frequently be referred to as the Levant, an area which we now refer to usually as the Middle East, including Egypt, the Arabian Peninsula, Mesopotamia, and modern-day Turkey. The 3 major religions in this area are and were Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All 3 of these religions are monotheistic, believing the same God of Abraham created the rules of the universe. And here's the prayers of the faithful. Jews believe that God made a covenant or pact with their ancestors, the Hebrews, and that they are God's chosen people. They await the coming of a Savior, the Messiah, or the Anointed One. Christians believe that Jesus of Nazareth was that Messiah. They believe that in Jesus, God took human form, preached among men and women, suffered execution, and rose from the dead and ascended to heaven after establishing the Christian church under the leadership of the apostles, or his closest disciples. Muslims, while accepting the Hebrew prophets and Jesus as divinely inspired, believe Muhammad to be the last and greatest prophet of God, the messenger of God, through whom Islam was revealed some 6 centuries after Jesus' lifetime. It's these 3 religions that will inspire most of the art that we'll look at in this period, and then later in the semester when we look at Islamic art. So when discussing the Bible, we can break it down, or it is separated into the New and Old Testament. The New Testament holds the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth as recorded between 70 and 100 CE in the Gospels attributed to the 4 apostles, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The final book is Revelation, with the Apocalypse, a series of intense visions and prophecies concerning the eventual triumph of God at the end of the world, written in about 95 CE. And I bring these up so that as we go through the course, you will have some point of reference. also know that St. Peter is also called the Rock of the Church, and he is considered the first pope. Two important moments played a critical role in the development of early Christianity. First, the decision of the Apostle Paul to spread Christianity beyond Jewish communities of Palestine into the Roman Greco world. Second, when the Emperor Constantine accepted Christianity and became its patron at the beginning of the 4th century. Christians were seen as antisocial because they didn't participate in social cults and civic cults. Because of this, they were persecuted. That is, until Constantine made Christianity legal. Also, Christianity is a monotheistic religion, so is Islam and Judaism, the worship of only one God. The second commandment is integral to the understanding of early Christian art. The second commandment commands that there shall be no idols or graven images, because as Christianity gained popularity, they needed to incorporate previously pagan ideas into the newer religion. Early Christians needed to use images because they were incredibly important in pagan cultures. The second commandment states, quote, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images." Graven referring to any image trying to represent a god, or the god. Here we have the sarcophagus of Junius Bassus. He was a Roman official who was newly baptized at his death. This piece is extremely interesting because it shows the transitional period between traditional Roman pagan iconography and the shift toward early Christian art and the development of a Christian iconography or Christian visual language for telling these important stories. This is an early example of religious openness. It shows the shift toward Christian ideals and burial, not cremation, which was how people were buried in the Roman Empire before the rise of Christianity. We see Christ here in the sarcophagus in the carving. He looks more like a Roman ideal than our traditional Western representation of Christ. He's atop a river god, showing the victory of Christianity over polytheism. We see some use of Roman naturalism here, but we're leaning toward an early Christian style. It's a very transitional piece. The iconography is being developed in this coffin. Since Christianity was a mystery religion that demanded initiation to participate in religious practices, Christian architecture put greater emphasis on the interior. The Christian churches needed large interior spaces to house the growing congregations and to mark the clear separation of the faithful from the unfaithful. At the same time, the new Christian churches needed to be visually meaningful. The buildings needed to convey the new authority of Christianity. These factors were instrumental in the formulation during the Constantinian period of the Christian basilica. The original Constantinian buildings are now known only in plan, but an examination of a still extant early 5th century Roman basilica, the Church of Santa Sabina, helps us to understand the essential characteristics of the early Christian basilica. The Church of Santa Sabina has a dominant central axis that leads from the entrance to the apse, the site of the altar. This central space is known as the nave, and is flanked on either sides by aisles. The architecture is relatively simple, with a wooden truss roof. The wall of the nave is broken by clerestory windows that provide direct lighting in the nave. The walls, apparently original, were decorated with mosaics. The interior would have had a dramatically different effect than a classical building. The nave wall of Santa Sabina has little sense of weight. The architect was particularly aware of the light effects in an interior space like this. The glass tile of the mosaics would create a shimmering effect, and the walls would appear to float. Light would have been understood as a symbol of divinity. Light was a symbol for Christ. The emphasis in this architecture is on the spiritual effect, not the physical. It is helpful to know that Byzantine art is generally divided into 3 distinct periods: the early Byzantine, lasting from 330 to 750, the Middle Byzantine, lasting from 850 to 1204, and the Late Byzantine, lasting from 1261 to 1453. Byzantine art includes work created from the 4th century to the 15th century, and encompasses parts of the Italian peninsula, the eastern edge of the Slavic world, the Middle East, and North Africa. Generally speaking, Byzantine art differs from the art of the Romans in that it is interested in depicting that which we cannot see, the intangible world of heaven and the spiritual. Thus, the Greco-Roman interest in depth and naturalism is replaced by an interest in flatness and mystery. A very generic way to identify Byzantine style is with these categories. There's a lot of gold, the images are very flat, there's a high proliferation of mosaics, elongated figures, the figures are usually floating with no solid ground, and there's just so much gold. During the early Byzantine period, Constantine legalizes Christianity. The capital moves to Constantinople in 330. The rule of Justinian builds the Hagia Sophia. There's the development of icons. And the period ends with Iconoclastic Controversy. Christianity flourished and gradually supplanted the Greco-Roman gods that had once defined Roman culture and religion. This religious shift dramatically affected the art that was created across the empire. The symbol of Byzantium is probably the Hagia Sophia. It is the great church in the capital city of Constantinople, or modern-day Istanbul, Turkey. It was built under Emperor Justinian in 537 Common Era. Hagia Sophia is the symbol of Byzantium in the way that the Parthenon embodies classical Greece, or the Eiffel Tower typifies Paris. The fabric of the building denies that it can stand by its construction alone. Hagia Sophia's building seems to cry out for an otherworldly explanation of why it stands, because much within the building seems dematerialized, an impression that must have been very real in the perception of the medieval faithful. Where ancient Greeks and Romans wanted to show the work their pieces of architecture were doing in an elegant way, the early Christian and Byzantine artists and architects wanted to conceal the effort of the architecture and make every aspect of design seem weightless, or in other words, more heavenly. Everything in art and architecture related to and reminded the viewer of an otherworldly mystery. This is especially evident when you see the interior of the structure. It's as if a golden dome is suspended from heaven. The faithful attributed the structural success of the Hagia Sophia to divine intervention. Justinian's biographer, Procopius, described it thusly, quote, "The huge spherical dome makes the structure exceptionally beautiful, yet it seems not to rest upon solid masonry, but to cover the space with its golden dome, suspended from heaven." The genius here is with the celebratory windows, which create the illusion from the ground that the dome is hovering, barely even touching the building itself. These windows also allow a heavenly illuminating light to flood the interior of the space, which itself glitters with gold and colored glass mosaics and the gilt dome. That the dome is divinely assisted is helped by the decoration surrounding the base of the dome. Cherubim occupy the pendentives as if they are holding up the structure. The present Hagia Sophia, or the Church of Holy Wisdom, became a mosque in 1453 following the conquest of Constantinople by the Ottomans under Sultan Mehmed II. In 1934, Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey, converted the mosque into a museum. We can't talk about Byzantium without talking about the icon, an image representing a sacred figure or event. Icons are venerated by the faithful who believe their prayers are transmitted through the icon to God. Icons were accepted as aids to meditation and prayer, as intermediaries between the people and God. Early examples like this one from Mount Sinai are rare. This particular icon is painted in encaustic, which uses wax to capture and hold the color. It's from St. Catherine's Monastery at Mount Sinai in Egypt. The icon shows the Virgin and the Child flanked by two soldier saints, St. Theodore to the left and St. George at the right. Above these are two angels who gaze upward to the hand of God, from which light emanates, falling on the Virgin. Describe what you see. Is there an attempt to render the figures with any amount of naturalism? Are there shadows? What about muscles? How is her drapery? There is a classical attempt at realism here, at naturalism. But now describe the scene. Where are they? How are the figures arranged? The composition displays a spatial ambiguity that places the scene in a world that operates differently from our world. The ambiguity allows the scene to partake of the viewer's world, but also separates the scene from the normal world. This supremely composed picture gives us an unmistakable sense of visual movement inward and upward, from the saints to the Virgin, and from the Virgin upward past the angels to the hand of God. The Iconoclastic Controversy. Remember that iconoclasm is the destruction of images, usually for a religious or ideological purpose. And this particular iconoclastic controversy dealt with the removal and destruction of images from churches all across Byzantium. In 726, Emperor Leo III publicly took a position against icons. There were three possible reasons for this. One, he wanted to integrate Muslim and Jewish populations into Christianity. Second, he wanted to limit the power and the wealth of the monasteries. Or three, it was possibly simply religious. The controversies ended in 787. Middle Byzantine art. The stylistic and thematic interests of the early Byzantine period continued during the Middle Byzantine period, with a focus on building churches and decorating their interiors. Wealthy patrons started commissioning private devotional objects like carved ivories and icons, which helped them gain access to the heavenly realm on a personal level. So, as much as it is tempting to describe all Byzantine art as ethereal or flattened, it is much more accurate to say that Byzantine art is diverse. There were many political and religious interests, as well as distinct cultural forces that shaped the art of different periods and regions within the Byzantine Empire. There's no more iconoclasm during the Middle Byzantine period, on a large scale. There was a resurgence of the patronage of the arts and images after the iconoclastic controversies. Co-emperors Michael III and Basil I commissioned this piece, The Virgin and Child in the Apse of the Hagia Sophia, and the Patriarch Photius preached that this was a historic moment and that icons should stay. This was a catalyst for the Macedonian Renaissance. This particular work is 16 feet high, and she holds an inscription claiming, "The images which the impostors cast down here, pious emperors have set up again." There is a sense of her being surrounded by divine light. This is an artist who is representing these images as something that is here to stay. These are solid figures, designed to move one both spiritually and emotionally, to inspire and to teach. Venice, Italy was controlled by the Byzantine Empire from the 6th to 7th century, with heavy influence until the 10th. The Doge, or Duke, had to be ratified by the Byzantine Empire. Venice is a crossroads of East and West. Because of their trade in those centuries, the city was enormously wealthy. It was the wealthiest city in the Western world. The famous explorer Marco Polo traveled from Venice in the 1270s and made it all the way to the Mongolian Empire. The Venetians steal the relics of St. Mark the Apostle from Alexandria in the 800s and bring them to Venice. This church is commissioned to house them. It's in the Byzantine style. What are some aspects of the church that make you think its architecture and decoration could be Byzantine? Here's an interior view. We see both domes and gold mosaics. It really does look like the Hagia Sophia. You might be interested to know that Venice is sinking into the sea, and with rising sea levels, it's sinking even faster. St. Mark's floods now almost every year. It's really bad for the church, and especially bad for the mosaics on the floor. The Paris Psalter. This work was unusually large and lavishly illustrated, with 14 full-page illuminations included in its 449 folios. A folio is a leaf in a book. 8 of these images depict the life of King David, who was often seen as a model of just rule for medieval kings. Because King David was traditionally considered the author of the Psalms, he is shown here in the role of musician and composer, sitting atop a boulder playing his harp in an idyllic pastoral setting. This manuscript represents a complex mixture of the classical pagan past and the medieval Christian present, and also marks the Macedonian Renaissance. A Renaissance at any time is when artists and scholars look back to classical ancient Greece and Rome for inspiration. The Macedonian Renaissance was part of an intentional revival of the classical past. Classical style, as a general term, refers to the naturalistic visual representation used during periods when, for example, the Roman emperors Augustus and Hadrian ruled. Remember that classical, with a capital C, is how we refer to the art of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. We see classical symbols and deities being replaced with Christians and Christian meanings, such as melody. A minor classical deity probably stands in for erudition and culture. David, the biblical king, is seated as a shepherd in the pose usually used by the Greek character Orpheus. Christians are adopting classical visual vernacular to tell their story. During this period, we also see the resurgence of icons. These devotional images sometimes worked miracles and often protected the city where they reside. Now we move into the last period of Byzantine art, the late Byzantine. Between 1204 and 1261, Crusaders from Western Europe invaded and captured Constantinople in 1204. This temporarily toppled the empire in an attempt to bring the Eastern Empire back into the fold of Western Christendom. By this point, Christianity had divided into two distinct camps: Eastern Orthodox Christianity in the Byzantine Empire and Western Latin Christianity in the European West. Italian and Russian arts carry on Byzantine traditions after the final fall of Constantinople in 1453. Chora Church in Constantinople was built originally in 1077 and renovated and restored in 1350 to 1321 by Theodore Metochites, a humanist poet and scientist and the administrator of the imperial treasury at Constantinople. A renovation of the earlier church to rival those by Justinian, like the Hagia Sophia. The Chora Church has the same technical sophistication and splendor of Justinian's commissions, but on a smaller scale. This is the apse of the funerary chapel in Anastasius, the church of the monastery of Christ in Chora. It is a representation of the resurrection in the apocryphal Gospel of Nicodemus. Jesus goes into limbo and saves righteous Hebrew from hell. Here, he's saving Adam and Eve, pulling them up. The same story is found in St. Mark's in Venice. During a funeral, the deceased head would have been directed toward this engrossing tableau facing the Last Judgment. Stylistically, what we see in the decoration of the church is a development and interest in humanism, in bringing God and the divine into a human place. These are extremely subtle shifts. Sometimes it doesn't click, and then one day you'll see it. Don't feel bad if you don't see it. Take my word for it. Russian icon painting is also very, very important and develops during this period. Rublev's icon here represents the Holy Trinity through three identical angels. It clearly illustrates how late Byzantine artists relied on mathematical conventions to create ideal figures, giving their work remarkable consistency. Byzantine artists wanted to invoke the spiritual realm with these unattainable perfections. When Mehmed II, the Ottoman Sultan, overran Constantinople, it transitioned from a Christian into an Islamic center of artistic production. Muslim architects and artists adopted many stylistic traits of Byzantium and melded them with their own rich aesthetic heritage into a new, and now Islamic, artistic effervescence. And we will look at them later in the semester.